I'm posting this personal account as both a warning to all and to honor my friends. I want people to hear the truth about what happened, even if no one believes me. I live in a rural part of Eastern Europe. I won't tell you exactly where because I don't want anyone to find this place. Mostly, the area I live in consists of small farming villages and vast open fields where shepherds and farmers tend to their flocks. The land is beautiful in a quiet, understated way. It's peaceful and unchanging, and time seems to pass without hurry. It's a place an artist could use as an inspiration or a monk could come for prayer and meditation. But to people like my friends and I, it is supremely dull. If you've seen one farm, you've seen them all. And I had no intention of drinking myself to death, like so many here do just to escape the monotony. Caitlin, Johan, and I met on an online forum. After chatting for a bit, we realized we were all relatively close to each other and bonded over our shared experience with life in our part of the world. What started as casual conversation soon became something I looked forward to, and we quickly became good friends. Over the course of a year, we met in person several times. Johan lived in the city about 2 hours away from my town, and Caitlin lived in a smaller village in between us. I had a car, so it made sense that I would pick up Caitlin and would go up together to spend the occasional weekend with Johan. Caitlin was a good person, better than Johan and I put together. She was the daughter of the town's priest, always scolding us for our not so righteous habits. Johan, on the other hand, was the life of the party. His world revolved around clubbing, drinking, smoking, and sleeping. As for me, I was the most boring of all. My focus in recent months had shifted to working hard to contribute to my sister's college fund, leaving little room for much else. During our time in the city, we would see the various museums and attractions the city offered. Johan even convinced Caitlin and I to join him in the escapades once. At least he had fun. But eventually, even Johan's big city became utterly boring to us. What had once been an exciting new opportunity to explore had become yet another routine of the same people and places. We needed something new, something that could give us the thrill and novelty we were all craving. I'm still surprised that the idea came from Caitlin. Maybe Johan had rubbed off on her a bit. Urban exploration, sneaking into abandoned buildings, forgotten places, and secret spots tucked away from the world. We discussed it in our group chat over the week. Johan was on board immediately. Unlike me, the thrill of exploring forgotten places was alluring to me too, but it seemed dangerous to me. On top of that, it felt like there was no reward for this danger. Still, we had nothing else to do, and my two friends promised we wouldn't go anywhere dangerous, only nearby places, and would always let someone know before we went. Honestly, Caitlin being for it is what convinced me. I guess I had her on a pedestal in my head, like she couldn't be wrong. I was under the impression we'd just be wandering into some old houses like a group of looters, and, at first, I was right. We started off small, a dilapidated old two-story house at the edge of my town. It wasn't big, only a single-story home that had been abandoned sometime during the mid-1900s. We found old photos of people who I'm assuming lived here, a tall man with a black beard and a woman with dark hair. They looked happy. Johan found a pocket watch in one of those drawers and put it in his bag. Caitlin scolded him for stealing, but he argued. It's not stealing if it doesn't belong to anyone. Besides, I'll do me more good than if we just left it to rust. Inwardly, I agreed with Caitlin, but not enough to press the issue. It was just an old watch. After all, I think that first house only grew our need to quell boredom. Each trip was different from the last, and each had its own mystery and surprises to it. It was the perfect hobby for us. We stuck to easy stuff for a while, mostly abandoned old houses, but eventually we aimed a bit higher. First, it was an old motel, then an apartment complex, then an empty hospital. They were relatively easy to find. There were plenty of old Soviet structures that haven't been used or lived in for a long time. We'd all search for new spots on forums and online during the week and decide where we wanted to go by the weekend. That's how we found the train station. I was actually the one who found out about it through an old online friend of mine. It was a subway from the Soviet era that hadn't been used since the 80s. It may not have been the flashiest structure we'd explore, but it was the most enticing. Long tunnels with dozens of rooms sprouting off of them like leaves from a vine. The possibilities were endless. I sent a message to our group chat, and the two of them were on board with me. The plan was, as usual, for me to pick up Caitlin on the way to Johan's. From there, it was about a 40-minute drive eastward, leaving the city. The setting once again became the familiar farmland that Caitlin and I knew so well. It only spurred us forward more eagerly to escape our boredom. We were like giddy children on Christmas morning the whole way there. It was pretty easy to find. Nothing else was nearby. I pulled off of the road and parked on a flat stretch of dirt, opposite of us with a cracked, neglected sidewalk leading to the entrance. A concrete welcome mat pointing us to the open maw of the subway system below. It was a pool of darkness, a thick wall of black separating the world from the things below. We had to come prepared, like we always did. We brought flashlights, a first aid kit, water, and snacks. I was hesitant at first. The dark passage seemed ominous, almost threatening, for a reason I couldn't quite explain. My friends didn't seem to share my anxieties, and they were eagerly down the stairs together. I didn't want to spoil the fun with my nerve, so I followed suit. My fingers trailed along the walls of old dusty life and brick until they opened up to reveal a massive cavern at the bottom of the steps. The station stretched before me, a long empty chamber split down the middle by the tracks, where trains once ran. Platforms flanked either side, their edges lined with towering support pillars that cast long shadows from our flashlights. Broken light fixtures dangled from the ceiling, and the sound of dripping water echoed throughout the room from multiple places. Exciting as it was, we didn't find anything that we didn't expect. Caitlin and I each studied the walls of the room, reading over the graffiti that decorated them. Johan was walking along the tracks. It was a strange sight, something I'd only ever seen in a movie. Moss and roots were creeping into the station from above, like skin regrowing over a wound, reclaiming the space 1 centimeter at a time. Our exploration of the main room didn't yield much, just a few waterlogged books, some decaying papers, and a couple of rotten wooden benches. I could feel the weight of disappointment on my friends, and honestly, I felt it too. After all, the planning and anticipation we had found nothing but moss and old debris. That's when I spoke up. Well, this is just the main room. There's still more. Remember the pictures in the forum? The tracks go on for miles. We've only seen a fraction of it. I wanted to lift their spirits, to keep the sense of excitement alive so that we hadn't wasted a weekend. Johan didn't seem to hear me at first, lost in his thoughts, but after a long moment, he glanced back, his eyes glimmering with that familiar spark. Yeah, you're right. Let's see what else is down here. Caitlin just nodded, the faintest trace of a smile playing on her lips. She had been fiddling with her necklace, a nervous tic I had picked up over the years. If there's more, I'll follow, just let's be careful. The mood shifted a bit, the excitement coming back in small doses, but it was clear we all wanted something more than what we had found. We weren't about to give up just yet. And so, we each jumped down onto the tracks, following Johan, lights pointed straight ahead. We wandered into the tunnel that led away from the main room. At first, it was just more of the same, graffiti, dust, and puddles of runoff water. We kept walking for a few minutes and the walls started to change. The graffiti grew sparse, as if the artist had stopped midway or simply didn't bother to go further in. Eventually it stopped altogether, leaving only bare stone and rusted pipes. Caitlin let out a short yelp as her foot stepped onto something with a crunch. We shined our lights at her foot. She had stepped on a bone. We all laughed in relief. It was only a dead rat, but by her foot I noticed something else, glimmering in the beam of her flashlight. I picked it up off the ground. It was a ring, old and caked in grime, but unmistakably made of gold. Hey, check this out, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Johan snatched it from my fingers and held it up to his eyes. Look at it. It's gold. Caitlin now wore a wide grin. She spoke up. Maybe someone dropped it during the last days of the subway, or maybe it's from someone important. You know, like a soldier or an official. How much do you think it's worth? I asked, admittedly with a hint of greed in my voice. Johan answered, rolling the ring between his fingers. At least a couple hundred, maybe more. Who knows? Caitlin chimed in gingerly. Maybe we could return it to someone. If it's a wedding ring, I'm sure someone's missing it. Johan scoffed with a dismissive tone. Return it? Seriously? It's probably been down here for years. If anyone's looking for it, they either died of old age or gave up by now. Caitlin hesitated before speaking her mind, as if she felt foolish for a suggestion. I don't know. It just doesn't feel right, you know? Like, it's got history. Someone cared about it. Johan shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it's just some old junk that got lost down here. Look, we don't even know whose it is, and besides, it's valuable. It's ours now. Free treasure. With that, Johan slipped it into his pocket. I was just happy that the discovery had brought the feeling of giddiness back. I felt like a kid exploring an amusement park with my friends again. With refreshed vigor, we continued down the dark tunnel. As we went, We began to notice an increasing amount of remains. Nothing particularly concerning. They looked like rodent bones. We figured that the subway was infested with rats, so it was normal to expect dead ones. All three of us stopped in our tracks at the same time. An open door stood to our right. We had passed a few doorways branching off the tunnel in the walk up until now. Some open like this one. I had assumed they were just maintenance rooms or something. What stopped us from the horrid stench of death and decay wafting from the other side. The darkness encircled by the doorway was so thick, I almost doubted our lights could cut through it. I'm not ashamed to admit I was afraid at this point. The entire setting had been creepy, and this smell was too much for just a few dead rodents. We're not going in there, right? I asked nervously. Johan backed me up, shaking his head. No way. Let's just keep on down the tunnel. There's a better chance to find stuff here anyway. But Caitlin stopped us. Wait. Listen. We did as she said. My ears perked up as a subtle breeze hit me from the door. I could barely hear it. It was so faint I thought I was imagining it. Then, I caught it. A quiet mumbling coming from the thick well of darkness. Johan's face had become pale. Apparently, he had heard it too. We should leave, he urged, his voice shaky. Caitlin resolved hardenedly. They could be hurt. What if they need our help? I stayed silent. I trusted Caitlin, but my gut was telling me not to set foot in that room. Seeing the uncertainty in our faces, Caitlin made a sudden decision. Without waiting for our agreement, she stepped into the darkness. Johan and I let out a groan of frustration. She knew we would follow her in, and we did. Jog walking in to catch up with her, we entered the room. It was another long hallway room. Though narrower and shorter than the one we had just left, piles of bones littered the floor to the point where it was impossible to avoid stepping on them. I wasn't sure about these. They seemed bigger than the ones from earlier. I could recognize a few of them, mostly skulls of goats and other livestock. I wanted to argue with Caitlin, but I knew it was pointless. Once she had her mind set on something, it was impossible to convince her otherwise. The voice had stopped by now, but I knew Caitlin would see through this regardless. Johan didn't share my temperament. With a hushed but desperate voice, he pleaded. Come on, it was nothing. Let's just turn around, okay? His words fell silent and we came to a halt. The lights from mine and Caitlin's flashlight had fallen on a strange structure in the center of the room. It was a rectangular box that came up about waist length. It looked to be a round crudely out of stone and wood. The top of the box was a mesh of what looked like bars made up from piping. At each of the four corners on the top of the box stood a small, sharp protrusion, almost like a horn. On the floor in front of the structure was a large metal bowl. It, too, was stained reddish-brown. Lastly, a simple rusty knife rested on the frame of the structure. Standing this deep in the room, the stench had grown worse. I could identify the smell of rot and ash mixed together with a stale metallic scent. The bones near the box were charred and black. We approached the structure together, curiosity briefly triumphing over our anxiety. I could see through the metallic grate of the top. A layer of ash and dust covered the bottom. Resting underneath what appeared to be fresh firewood, reddish-brown stains adorned in inside of the horns, as well as the base on top of the structure. Its walls were lined with crude carvings that I didn't recognize, ancient-looking patterns and symbols. I saw Caitlin's eyes widen when they studied them. Before I could inquire, Johan gagged. Oh shit. His light was pointing ahead, past the structure to the wall behind it. There, slumped against the wall, was a corpse. It looked ancient, its skin thin and dry, pulled tight against the bones like it had been lying there for centuries. The face, though, faded, still held traces of feature of a man, but one thing stood out to me in particular. There was a mark on its arm that didn't seem as decayed as the rest of it. In fact, it looked like a fresh carving or tattoo. I don't really know how to describe the marking to you, other than it looked like a symbol from an old language I didn't recognize. I stammered. What the hell is that? Johan ignored my question. We need to get out of here and call the cops. Caitlin was staring at the markings on the corpse's arm. I could see the cogs in her head turning like she recognized them, but couldn't quite place from where. I pressed her. Cat, what is that? I'm not sure. It looks familiar. I've seen it before somewhere. We were silent for a moment, letting her think. I knew Johan was making sense and wanting to leave, but a part of me wanted to stay. Wasn't this hobby all about exploring and excitement to begin with? Why should we fail at the greatest memory we had found so far? I wanted to know more. Our silence was interrupted by a sound, a steady pattern of quiet wheezes. That's when I noticed it. We had been transfixed on the marking on its forearm that we hadn't paid attention to the whole corpse. Its chest was rising and failing in a fixed pattern. It was breathing. Johann swore under his breath and stumbled back, nearly tripping over the uneven floor. My stomach twisted into a knot. Holy shit, I whispered. It's alive. Catelyn took a step closer. No, no, that's not possible. But even as she said it, her voice wavered. The breathing was shallow, barely noticeable. But now that I had seen it, I couldn't unsee it. The corpse, if it even was a corpse, wasn't as lifeless as we had thought. Johann shook his head furiously. I don't care what it is. We're leaving now. He grabbed both of our arms and began to drag us out when we were again interrupted. It spoke. A dry, raspy whisper filled the room, like wind scraping against stone. It was the same incoherent mumbling we had heard before. Catelyn leaned closer. Her ears strained to make out the words. It was just barely loud enough for me to hear. The blood cries out. The ground remembers. Caitlin went to the corpse and knelt beside it. We can help you. We can get you to a hospital. I admire her bravery, but there are many compliments I would give her. But above all, she valued the lives of others above her own, even going so far as to risk herself for this withered thing we had stumbled across. The corpse didn't really seem to notice her at all. It continued on with its fervent whispers. Hidden from his presence, restless, wanderer. The events that followed this point will be difficult for me to describe with complete accuracy. It happened quickly, and it's painful for me to remember, but I will try to do my best. I think what caused it was our lights. You see, Caitlin was leaning over in an attempt to help the man we had found. In doing so, her necklace had fallen out past the collar of her shirt and was dangling freely in the air. Johann and I were still shining our flashlights at it. This caused the crucifix at the end of the necklace to shine, catching the attention of the corpse. I saw its eyes, shriveled like dried out raisins, shift to it. Its mumbling stopped, hushed by a sudden raspy inhale. It grabbed Caitlin by the hair, yanking her back as she screamed. Johann and I both rushed to help her, the light from her flashlights moving erratically in her panic. Johann grabbed it by its shoulder in an attempt to pull it off of Caitlin. In one swift motion, it snatched something from the ground, a sharp bone, or maybe an old knife, and drove it deep into his thigh. He let out a strangled cry of pain. It stood up from the wall with snapping limbs and cracking bones, its grip on Caitlin still like iron. One swing of its shriveled arm sent him to its back. He sent the ground with a hard thud, and then get back up, try to help Caitlin too. Copying its idea, I grabbed a rib bone from the floor and planted it firmly into its side. The bone pierced the corpse's rotten flesh with a sound like stabbing a canvas, but it didn't so much as flinch. I hadn't seen the stone in its hand. It must have grabbed it before standing. It raised its hand and brought the rock onto my skull with the force of a hammer. My vision went white for several moments. When I regained it, the ward was horizontal. I was on my side on the floor, facing the rectangular structure. I willed my limbs to move, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I was concussed and dazed. The corpse dragged Caitlin, kicking and fighting, to the structure, where it forced her to tear her knees. It rested its palm on her head and shut its withered eyes. Caitlin's eyes widened in what looked to me like both realization and horror. She pleaded with it. No, you can't. It won't work. But her begging was cut short. The corpse picked up the knife from the top of the structure and slit Caitlin's throat before I had recovered enough to even stand. It leaned her head over the bowl of the floor, collecting her blood. I wanted to scream, cry, beg for this all to just be a nightmare, but I know it wasn't. I hadn't led my friends into a living hell. Still struggling to push the fog out of my head, I forced myself to my feet. The corpse paid me no mind. It had already set fire to the wood within the structure. I didn't and still do not understand its actions. It took the bowl of Caitlin's blood and sprinkled it onto the four horns of the box with its leathery fingers. It proceeded to set the body of my friend on top of the box, cremating her. I stumbled to Johann, who was still on the floor. I heard him groan and pulled at his arm. We need to go. We need to run. Now, get up. I succeeded in pulling him up, and you wrapped his arm over my shoulder to support him. I glanced back before I left. It was kneeling in front of the fire, its arms open to the ceiling above and its face pointing up. It's like it was waiting for something to happen, like it was praying for something. I'm not sure. When nothing did happen, it began to shake. It let out a butter shriek and curled into a ball. Before the flames, an inhuman wail of agony and despair echoed throughout the entire subway system. Still on its knees, it snapped its spine around to face us. Then, it let out another noise, this time one of pure, unmistakable rage. I practically dragged Johan out of the room. He had recovered enough by now to at least somewhat assist me in our escape. We made it out of the offshoot room and slammed the door behind us. I jammed my flashlight into the handle in an attempt to barricade the monster inside. Still, I knew that would only buy us a little bit of time. We stumbled down the long tunnel from where we had come for only a few seconds before I heard pounding on the door. It sped us up, fueling us with adrenaline and a fear. After we had gone maybe 70 meters down the tunnel, I heard a loud bang from behind us. I knew what it was, and so did Johan. As we limped on, I could hear uneven footsteps behind us. It was close. We made it to the main station. I could see the staircase, our doorway to safety, but we still needed to throw ourselves over the high ledge onto the platform, and the footsteps were so close now. I pulled myself up and got to my feet, reaching down to pull the injured Johan up. He grabbed my hand and I pulled. Johan was a big man, and I'm not this strong. Not to mention the concussion on Johan's stabbed leg. Saying these things now, they feel like excuses. The corpse emerged from the dark tunnel, dragging itself in a crooked spirit towards us. It had picked up another stone, larger than the one it used on me. I pulled with all my strength, but I couldn't save him. It tackled Johan to the floor, pinning him down by the waist. It lifted the stone with both hands above its head and brought it down onto Johan's face with force. It beat my friend to death with his stone, and I knew I couldn't stop it. In my cowardliness, I fled. I ran up the stairs and into the light of day. I didn't stop until I was in my car. I peeled onto the road and pressed the pedal to the floor. In my rearview mirror, I saw the corpse run out of the subway after me. It was covered in blood, the blood of my friends. As it shrunk in my mirror behind me, I could hear one last wail of anger and sorrow. Up until I reached home. About 3 hours away, I locked my doors, shut my curtains, and hid in my room. I felt as if it would find me, like I'd hear the awful mumbling again, like it would break down my door, like I had in the tunnel, but it never did. 3 days went by, and nothing happened. I called the police and reported what had happened. They searched the subway and found nothing. It's not honestly surprised. That place is a labyrinth. If something didn't want to be found down there, it likely wouldn't be. In the end, my statements were discredited. I was questioned for the disappearance of Johan and Caitlin, but there was nothing that could incriminate me. They concluded that the two of them had simply gone missing during one of our urban explorations. But I know the truth. They didn't get lost or go missing. They were murdered by a dead man. I had failed both of my friends and led them to their deaths. For my own sanity, I need to tell someone, even if no one believes me. I didn't know what that thing is. There are stories around here, Dracula, werewolves, demons, and maybe it was something like that. I don't know, but I stabbed it deep enough to kill any man, and it didn't even notice. Whatever it is, please, don't look for it. It isn't worth it. I wish I could undo the choices we made, but I can't. Don't make the same mistake we did. Don't let curiosity take you down this path. It leads you only to sorrow and loss. Do what I should have done. Be happy with what you have.